must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Okay, welcome back everyone to Anonymous Bites Back. Tonight I have a special episode with whistleblower David McBride. He is a lawyer and a veteran, went to Afghanistan actually 3 times, but 2 times as a soldier, and he exposed some serious crimes committed by Australian soldiers in Afghanistan, and right now he is, am I saying it correctly, is being prosecuted for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm facing a lifetime in prison.
A lifetime in prison for doing the right thing, I guess. Hey, yeah, so I'm making it very simple. Just perhaps you want to explain like the basics behind this story for people who've never heard about this before. Yeah, so I'm making it very simple.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me on the show. First, I was I went to law school in Australia, and then I joined the British Army, and I was in the British Army because I went to university in England. And then I came back to Australia, and I was a lawyer in Australia, and I eventually joined the Australian Army as a lawyer. That is, I wear a uniform, and I was attached to the Special Forces, and you go to Afghanistan or any other place where they're operating, but Afghanistan, and you watch what goes on, and you try to make sure that everything is done legally. Most of the time it was. For example, the well-known thing that you see on the television and movies is sort of attacks by drones where they fire missiles. And the Taliban, he could be fighting on a mountainside, or he could be riding his motorbike. But you identify someone as a terrorist, and and by various different means, and then we what we call target them, which basically means we try to kill them. And you have a lawyer there to sort of say, yeah, look, I'm satisfied to prove that person is Taliban, or actually, no, that person could be a civilian and we're not going to fire that missile. And lawyers try to also teach the soldiers to say, this is how you can recognise the Taliban. You know, if they've got weapons, if they're going to attack you, you can legally fire at them, but you can't just go around and shoot anybody who you're suspicious of. And by and large, it worked okay. What I became suspicious of on my second trip in Afghanistan was more the big picture sort of stuff to begin with, not unlike what Julian Assange or what WikiLeaks exposed in the Iraq waters, but to say what we were saying was going on was what was actually going on, in that we were running it's almost like a big advertising campaign. The whole war was an advertising campaign where we were putting out messages to say how well it was going and what a good job we were doing, but actually behind the scenes, we were murdering a lot of people. We were sometimes giving medals, bravery medals to soldiers who had murdered civilians. We were covering all of that up, and in order to make sure that the public didn't find out about these bad things, we would sometimes do sham investigations of things that weren't crimes or whatever, and we were just doing everything for show. We would pretend to investigate things and not investigate them, and sometimes we would actually cover up things, terrible things, murders of children, and it was all about putting out a big public image. And it was not just a couple of bad soldiers. That will always happen in war. It was, what really worried me was this was done by generals, people at the very top of the pyramid, and with collusion with politicians, in that this was, again, a bit like what WikiLeaks exposed. This was not a couple of bad soldiers. This was people at the very top who were involved and complicit in a very big crime, and that's what worried me. And eventually, I tried to make complaints within the system. I went to the Australian High Command and I said, look, something's not right. We are meant to be an organisation where we tell the truth. It's meant to be central to everything that we do things by the book. And if we make mistakes, we admit it, and we have trials and whatever. But it looks like we are not following our own laws. You know, we are not investigating things properly. We are giving medals to murderers, as I said, and there are some things going on. And I was still working within the system. I was hoping they might say, yeah, look, it's a hard war and we understand where you're coming from and we're going to try to clean things up a little bit. But instead of doing that, they turned on me, and I was kind of bullied and ostracised within the Defence Force for being a troublemaker. They didn't look into any of the things that I asked them to look into. It's a typical story about whistleblowers now. At the time I was quite shocked, but I can see it's typical. It's what often happens to whistleblowers is that you just get ostracised, and, you know, they gave me mental health reviews. They sent me to psychiatrists and said it was all in my imagination. They even paid psychiatrists to tell me, yeah, it was in my imagination. And at the time I kind of half believed it, because you think, well, maybe maybe it is. They try to gaslight you, I think the term is, you know. I went to the police. They weren't that interested. They said, oh, well, you know, military matters come within the military. We can't do much about it. And I even went to quite a few journalists, and again, because a bit like WikiLeaks again, because the issues were very big and they involved government corruption as well as soldiers murdering people, a lot of mainstream media didn't really want to touch it. And that won't be a surprise to your viewers or listeners. You will be aware of that. But I found that quite surprising. As I said, I didn't come from an activist background. I came from a sort of very much establishment background, and I was quite surprised how hard it was to get people to care about the story. Eventually, I did find some journalists who cared, and that was from an organisation called the Australian Broadcasting Commission, which is a government-owned vehicle who are probably the only people who are ever going to run this story, because it was too contentious. And while it's strange that they're a government company, they're the only people who would really have the backbone to cover a story like this. And they did, because they knew it was classified documents. I gave them many 100 classified documents, because like with WikiLeaks again, these stories are complicated. They need a lot of documents to back them up, and I knew that if I didn't have the documents, the military could just say, oh, he just imagined it. It never happened. So I gave the documents to the journalists, and then they published them on the internet, and a story called the Afghan Files. And I knew then that I would probably going to be arrested, so I went to Spain to try to avoid being arrested, because it was quite clear where the documents had come from. They'd come from me, because I had been agitating about it within the Defence Force for a couple of years. And then about the same time, possibly because of the revelations on the Australian, the ABC, the military started to do their own war crimes inquiry, a thing called the Brereton Inquiry, which took about 4 years, and they did confirm late last year. They confirmed that there's about 39 cases of suspected murders, and 19 soldiers who will likely be charged with murder. They've still got a fair bit to run, and I suspect the government is trying to draw the whole process out, because they don't really want anybody to find out about it. Like with all of these things, it's run by the government. The investigations are run by the government, and there's a certain amount of self-interest in the way that they run it. But
they started in May 2016, and they only made it public in November 2020, right? And it was done by
right.
Paul
Brereton. And even then, that's right. And even then, there's no charges have even been laid. You know, the trials might not be finished till 2030. This is 20 years after some of the offences were committed, and so that's just it's too long, and especially when one of them, which you would have seen, or some of you would have seen on the television, they call it Soldier C, but it's the Killing Fields, I think, the ABC, where there's video footage from a helmet cam of an Australian soldier shooting an Afghan who's just sitting in a field, and the Australian soldier says to his boss, "Should I shoot him?" And we don't hear the answer, but he obviously says yes or something, and the soldier goes bang bang and shoots the guy dead. I mean, that's clearly caught on video footage, and that guy hasn't even been charged yet. And you'd say it doesn't look like they're trying that hard, So there is good news in that something has happened. The bad news is that I'm the only one that's facing charges, it's. But again, it's good good to see the truth come out, and I'm very grateful to be on your show today.
Yeah, and I was reading into it a bit. There does seem to be some support, right? I mean, there's this petition started by that Afghan Australian lawyer Arezu Savi.
Yeah, that was good. That made me very happy because I don't know her at all. She just heard about the case, and she said that she was offended by it, and that I did the right thing, and that was really nice that she's Afghan Australian, and she got a petition together and started getting signatures. Eventually, we got 50,000 signatures from around the world, and a lot of people from overseas as well, saying, how can you prosecute this guy who was actually trying to do the right thing and say, look, something is not right, and you agree that something wasn't right, but you just don't like the fact that, he spoke to the press and embarrassed the government.
Yeah, and we discussed a little before the show about that actually, like, there's so few media talking about it, and you just gave that example about the military doing its own investigation too, and it takes 4 years drawing it out, making sure that it like lasts forever, and there is like not this one moment of a big shock effect that everyone wakes up to everything. No, it's just being drawn out, and like slowly it drips into the public. In that sense, keeping it a bit quiet, right? Because
yeah. Well, it's good to speak to a sophisticated audience like you guys have, because nothing is what it seems. It's they have a lot of spin doctors behind the scenes that work on this, and you can see that they think, hey, we've got a problem here. We've got all these murders, and how are we going to deal with it? And they come up with a plan, which is, we'll draw it out, we'll leak a little bit here, we'll leak a bit of there, we'll take 4 years to do the initial investigation. I mean, they haven't even started on the criminal investigation yet. The trials will take more years after that. And they had a very similar experience in the UK, where after the Iraq War and the Afghan War, they had allegations of a lot of war crimes, again, largely against their special forces. And they a bit exactly like Australia, they made a big fuss. They did a lot of media releases, and after 10 years and like millions and millions spent, not a single British soldier was charged and successfully convicted of war crimes, and yet they made a big fuss about it. It's a bit like it's all a big show where they want to keep both sides happy. On the one side, they say, oh, we're going to have trials. This is very, very bad. This is terrible. On the other hand, they want to keep the kind of conservatives happy who don't like the idea of soldiers being put on trial. So they say they're going to have trials, but they draw it out for as long as they possibly can, and then there are no trials. And it's all a bit of a sham. Luckily, we've got some people who are onto them about that. But I'm cynical about whether there will ever actually be any trials. And in some ways, it's good that I'm on trial because it stops the whole thing going away quietly. Because if I go to jail, a lot of people will be saying, "Hang on, why is the whistleblower going to jail when none of the people that actually killed people are going to jail?" And that'll make it hard for the government to sweep it under the carpet.
Yeah, but that is the perfect thing you're saying, right? Because that does remind people, I think, of the Assange case too, where we see this collateral murder video and we see these soldiers shooting civilians and 2 journalists, and then we see Assange being in a little prison there. But we don't see any of these people who committed these murders being put on trial. Nothing of that.
I think that's a really important thing, and it's to keep bashing away at with the Assange trial, to say not only were they not jailed, those pilots, but they the inquiry cleared them, and not only that, but the military leadership tried to cover it up by showing a sort of severely edited version of what what actually went on. And this is a big deal. I mean, tampering with evidence and putting it out there in order to sort of fool the public, that's a big deal. And you're right. We need to kind of keep demanding some sort of answers, because the problem is that's almost, well, it isn't almost, it is. The Americans saw public opinion as the real goal. They never really wanted to win the war in Iraq. They weren't that stupid that they thought they were going to win it. All they wanted to do was to win the media war. So putting out false media statements was part of. They just saw it as like carrying out a military operation, and that's what we need to attack. To say, you think that it's okay just to lie to the public all the time, but it's not. And Julian Assange didn't, as people have pointed out, nothing that he published or WikiLeaks published, nothing was untrue. It was all absolutely. It's never, there's no claim that it was a forgery or anything. It was all real documents, thousands and thousands of real documents, which showed the truth. And we have a real war at the moment of false government statements versus the truth of activists, and that's it's really worth fighting that fight.
Okay, so since we already started talking about your situation, in the chat is already someone asking a question and saying, what has the fallout been for for you, and how has your life actually been affected by all of this?
It's been hard. It has been hard, and I've since read about whistleblowers, and it's been typical. But the problem about being a military whistleblower is you lose all your friends, you lose your sense of identity. I liked being in the military. I was proud of who I was, and when your own government starts to commit crimes, you've got no choice but to try to expose them. It was my duty, but it meant that I was on my own. I drank a lot of alcohol. I used drugs because I just had to try to stay. I had to try to stay, optimistic, because I didn't think it was going to turn out well. My marriage collapsed because I had to really make a choice between my marriage and going on with trying to expose corruption, and I really couldn't let it drop. I knew that these issues are very important for the world. If we keep on making wars based on lies and murdering civilians and pretending that we didn't, we're going to be in a state of perpetual war. I mean, someone who, like myself, who had access to the evidence, I had to stand up. It was my duty to do what I did, but it was very bad. As I said, I ran away to Spain. I thought about suicide because I first started to make complaints back in 2013. So, and I wasn't arrested till 2017, I think, or 2018. So I had 5 years kind of in the wilderness, and I was, I was very, very low. Luckily, I would occasionally meet people who would say, "We support you, keep it up," but it's a lonely road, and luckily, ironically, once I got arrested, I started to get some support. People came forward and said, "Look, this is bullshit. You're obviously trying to do the right thing." And actually, I feel better now than I did a couple of years ago, because I've got quite a lot of support. I've got a lot of people that contact me all around the world and say, "Good on you for standing up to lies in the government and war crimes and murders." And I feel good about it, and I'm prepared to go to jail if necessary, because I really feel strongly about these issues, and if we have to bring a light to them to say it really matters, if the Western democracies, if the people who are claim to be the good guys of the world are actually the bad guys of the world, it really matters. We need to. We're just going to. We end up creating terrorists with real grievances if we murder people and then cover it up. We have to follow the law, and we have to do the right thing. And people like myself that witness it have to stand up against it. But it's been it's been a wild ride. As I say to my friends, it's the sort of battle I've always wanted in my life. But I wouldn't really recommend it. It's been pretty tough. I've got 2 children. It's been very tough on them. Luckily, they support me, and I've got a bit of a network now. There's an exhibition on in Melbourne, and at the moment you can see pictures. It's called Photo 2021, and it's got photographers from around the world, and it's got pictures of me and other whistleblowers in it, which is good. And they're up on billboards in the sort of one of the major cities in Australia. So momentum is building, and I'm very grateful for your supporters, and having me on the show, because the more people I speak to, the better I feel.
Yeah, and I personally think you have a lot more support than you think. But if the supporters of whistleblowers were the dominant voices in the media, right, we wouldn't even be in this entire situation. So.
No, that's right. That's right. Well, I do occasionally get that. People say to me, look, you've got more support than you realise, but a lot of people are afraid. People who work in the government, they don't want to come forward, and that's good. That's good to hear that, and hopefully there's a few other whistleblower cases in Australia going on at the same time. So hopefully it'll give people courage to come after me, and we can slowly build it, because all that needs to happen for good things to go on is that people need to speak up, because we don't even follow our own procedures. It's not even any great mystery. Often the government department is meant to do, follow the law or do X or whatever, and we end up doing Y, and it's obviously quite clear. And if more people can come forward and say, look, we're not even following our own laws, we've got a chance of turning around the trajectory where the governments think they can get away with breaking the law just because they're the government.
Yeah. Yeah, and okay, so and technically in September 2018 they charged you with the theft of Commonwealth property, right? And breaching the Defence Act, unlawfully disclosing a Commonwealth document. That's pretty much what they're calling it, right?
Yeah, that's right. First, they just charged me with theft, of the actual document. It would have actually been just of the pieces of paper, because he wouldn't that the information was printed on, because the theft charge didn't have anything to do with any kind of national security. And I think the reason they did that was that they were hoping that I'd plead guilty to it, and the case would go away. It was kind of like, it was an incentive for me, because if I'd pled guilty to the theft charge, I probably wouldn't have gone to jail. I would have got some minor thing. I wouldn't be able to practice as a lawyer, but I wouldn't have gone to jail. And I think they were trying to scare me and say, look, if you plead guilty to this, it'll all be over. But I didn't. I wouldn't do that. It was a bit of a game of chicken, I guess. And then, because I wouldn't plead guilty to the theft charge, because I said, look, I was justified in taking the documents because I needed to expose crime, and they put more charges on. They found 5 more charges, and these ones were much more serious. These were sort of espionage charges, again, like Julian Assange is facing, which are totally inappropriate for someone who was just a whistleblower. I gave documents to a sort of a very trusted news company. I didn't have anything to do with, any other nation, China or Iran or whatever, and yet they're charging me as if I was giving away nuclear secrets to like a foreign country. And there's actually there's no upper limit to what I could face. Like I could be facing 200 years in jail kind of thing. They've hit me with the most serious possible charges. The reason I'm not, well, I am bothered about it, but the reason I feel confident about it is part of the charge is that it wasn't my duty to speak to the journalists. And I want to argue the case on this and to say, actually, as a lawyer and as a military officer charged with defending the country, it was exactly my duty to stand up and be counted, and it was exactly my duty to take the documents to the journalists. I didn't do that first. I didn't see the journalists until 2016. I'd first reported my concerns to the military 3 years earlier. So I'd done everything I could within the system, but I just kept getting fobbed off and ignored. And not only that, I got bullied and ostracized. And that, if you're in an organisation and you make a complaint about something being not right, and not only do they not do anything about it, but they start bullying you and ostracizing you as a result, you must have been right. You must have been onto something. It's a bit like Julian Assange's case. If he hadn't embarrassed the US quite so much, they wouldn't be putting nearly so much evidence in there. But he obviously hit a nerve. It wasn't a coincidence, or they weren't having a bad day or whatever. He exposed the fact that the US government is basically run like a criminal organisation, and they do not like that, and they probably organise the change of government in Ecuador in order to get him. I mean, they will never stop trying to chase him, and that in some ways that's a sign that he hit the nail on the head. He really hit a nerve, exposing the truth about US foreign policy since the year 2000.
Yeah, and they're treating you like some kind of spy or whatever. But you went to not only to ABC, but you went first to internally in the military, and then you even tried to talk to the Australian Federal Police, right?
Yeah, I met with the police, and they were quite good. The police have been good. I don't have a problem with that. But they were like, "Oh yeah, we see what you're talking about, but we don't have jurisdiction in the military." And I was like, "Well, that's the problem. Nobody has jurisdiction in the military, and except the military, and they're corrupt. And there was nothing that they couldn't get away with, and that's half the problem." But yeah, I did. I went to the police in 2014, and they didn't really care. But and the good thing about the police is that they have admitted that, and so in my case, that will be quite clear. If the police had been really corrupt, they could have denied that, and they could have said, "Oh, he never saw us," or whatever, and they could have destroyed the documents. But to their credit, they have admitted that, and they have produced the documents, and they said, yeah, he did come to see us in 2014. So that will really help my case, because I tried to do the right thing. And there's, we will be able to ask the court to say, well, what is someone meant to do if they think there's corruption in an organisation and they see the police and the police do nothing? They make an internal complaint and it goes nowhere. I mean, what else can you do but go to the media? And that will be good for me in my case, because as a lawyer, there's no way I could have dropped it. If you see crime, you've got to do something about it. You can't just say, "Oh, it's all too hard. I don't know what to do next." You've got to you've got to do what you can, and the media is a way to do something. It might not work, but I mean, it's something you've got to try. That's why I'm always happy to speak to you. I mean, we need to get the word out. You can't rely on the mainstream media to sort of do the right thing, but you need to. These issues are very important, and we need to speak about them.
Yeah, and I think that was crucial to mention. You tried like every possible organization, like official organization, before you even went to the media, and that's the thing, and that is crucial, I think, in proving the fact that you tried to do the right thing, and that. And I'm glad that they at least admitted that you went there.
Yeah, the police were good, and normally with whistleblowing cases, it's sort of like a disgruntled employee who's not happy about the way they've been treated, or it's something to do with their own career promotion or something. But that wasn't the case in my case. This was about things that I saw from a distance that were nothing to do with me. But I was just like, hang on, that's not right. That's not the way we're meant to be dealing with this situation. And again, that should help me, because it's not about me in this sense. It's about what I saw other people doing, and the fact that we weren't following our own procedures. We weren't following the law because we didn't want the truth to come out. We didn't want the public to.
I agree with you. So okay, so these Afghan files, right? They were about war crimes or crimes committed by soldiers, but they also had to do with internally with sex crimes, right? Against like female soldiers and stuff. Is that something you want to talk about?
Yeah, there was a lot of things wrong in the Defence Force, and again, it goes to big issues where everything was about putting out false messaging, and sometimes it was to do with sex crimes, sometimes it was to do with war crimes, but we would everything was run. It was if it was a political party in an election, so they'd think about what's a good message that the public want to hear. And we'll put out that good message, It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. We'll just make stuff up, make a glossy advertisement, say everything is fine in the Defence Force, We've got this matter in hand, even though it was the absolute opposite, And I was angry about this, because I'd say we are meant to tell the truth. We're meant to tell the truth even when it's not. Sometimes people don't want to hear it, but that's part of we're an organisation. The country relies on us to say, this is what's going on, this is what we're doing about it. It's an unfortunate incident or whatever. But we didn't do that. We thought it was more important to put out false messages which made the government popular than actually telling people the truth. And I thought that was a very it was a very dangerous precedent to be set. It was a bit like the weapons of mass destruction or sort of scandal where they wanted to, the Americans, it seems like they wanted to invade Iraq, and they were looking for a problem, looking for a reason to do it, and they got the intelligence reports and they changed them to say Saddam Hussein was much more dangerous than he really was. They knew it was false. Because they wanted a particular result. They wanted to go to war, and they changed the facts to suit that thing. Now that happened in Australia as well, and smaller. We knew about the weapons of mass destruction being false, but also we were doing the same thing in the military, where we would, whether it was a sex crime or a war crime, we work out what the official story was going to be. We put out that, and usually anything which made the government look good, we'd put that out, and we'd cover up what actually went on, and that made me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, what I want listeners maybe to think about too is, so when you're dealing with the military, you're not just dealing with armed forces going into an area, but you're dealing with a whole media machine too, right? And they make their own story about everything, and they do whatever they can to defend their armed forces. And so they can't use a whistleblower, and they will like discredit him at all cost, and use the media for that too, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's a surprising fact for the listeners, and I guess they've learned it from Vietnam or whatever. But militaries are now a bit like corporations, and they have very big media teams.
Yeah.
The media teams contact the newspapers all the time. For example, in my case, the Defence Force media team contacted journalists and said, "Don't speak to Dave McBride. He's crazy," and they'd say all sorts of things about me. He's a criminal. He's crazy or whatever. And the journalists wouldn't publish this, but they just stay away from the story because they want to keep the military on side because they make money by getting scoops from the military, and they probably get paid cash as well. And so it's a bit like trying to get a negative story out about a big American, Coca-Cola or some big American corporation. They control a lot of media, and it would be quite hard to to beat them. And the military are like that. And I think it's a lot of the problem is caused by the connection of the military to the politicians. They've worked out, I think, from maybe the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s, that if the public are happy with the military, they'll be happy with the government. George Bush was re-elected in 2004 with a increased majority, even though the invasion of Iraq was very unpopular, and people, the politicians they use the military, and they want to put out strong messages with the military. They use a lot of media teams to make the messages up. So whistleblowers like myself are fighting very well-resourced media teams that are saying the opposite to what I'm saying. And it's very hard to, it's a bit like Julian Assange, again, perfect example your listeners will know. It's been very hard for him to fight the smears against him and to break that establishment narrative because they control the newspapers, and that's one of the factors which makes it quite hard for whistleblowers.
Yeah, and in the chat someone is saying and cyber teams and social media teams, and that's what I was pointing towards too, that part of military operations now are also creating this whole public opinion in support of certain wars, also to defend the army against so-called accusations. But so they're active in the media by literally, like you're saying, contacting outlets and saying like, this crazy, don't talk to this guy. But also they're active on social media, right? And we're dealing with that every day.
Yeah. This is one of the things, again, it's good to have a sophisticated audience. Like, this is one of the things that really bothers me. They have bots and paid people on social media who pretend to be normal, everyday citizens.
Yeah. Who
will say things like, David McBride's a bad person, he's a traitor, he needs to be killed or whatever. And they're actually working for the government. And what's more, they're being paid for by taxpayer-funded, which is totally illegal. And because they do it through subcontractors and subcontractors, they're getting away with it. But you're right, the online war is real now, and it comes from military operations. That's right. In Afghanistan, for example, we were using social media to try to help us or whatever. But they've brought that back to domestic, or back to Australia and back to the UK. Yeah, we use online social media underhand tactics to fight the war back in our own countries, and it's as if it's a military operation. Yeah, that's called information operations, and that's if I win my case, and my next step is I want to write a book called Information Operations, and it deals with a term some of your listeners will know called PSYOPs, which means psychological operations, which is where all that stuff that you were talking about, where they spend a lot of money. And it's, it's an official operation where they have people in rooms and PowerPoint and, pointing out, now we're going to put this on Twitter, now we're going to put this on Facebook, we're going to release this story here. And they spend a lot of money running, the online, the psychological operations. And it's very, very worrying. It's sort of, there's a movie called Vice about Vice President Dick Cheney, and it's very accurate, I believe, and it's about the Gulf War where they invaded Iraq, and the use of focus groups to find out what the public think is acceptable, and then once they get the results of the focus group, they then use online staff and paid journalists to put out their looks like a groundswell of public support, but it's actually the government supporting their own programs in an underhand way.
Yeah. So, and I was also interested in mentioning this because we actually dealt with something we exposed last year, and had to do with the Iran situation around when the Soleimani was killed, the Iranian general, and that there was suddenly, like within minutes, there was a hashtag created. There was supposedly a grassroots revolution hashtag. But it went so fast, and then we saw so many strange accounts being involved with it, that I put out this message saying, like, I got a little doubt about this hashtag, and then we did some research in it, and all the accounts were coming from 5 NATO countries, the location, right? Yeah. So all these Iranian activists in the street were apparently all tweeting from 5 NATO countries. And when we started posting about that on that hashtag, started confronting them, within hours after that, the entire hashtag was gone. It was trending, and within hours it was completely gone, and thousands of accounts disappeared. So it seemed to me like we were and we were raided too. Like literally, there were hundreds of accounts, like literally descending on us and saying like, "Yeah, no, this is all real." And but it had to do, I think, with an attempt to cause like a regime change operation.
It's good to talk to you about that, and it's like it's music to my ears because, as I said, it's been a hard road, and you start to think you're going mad. But I've had a lot of kind of online attacks, and it's hard to get the normal people to really understand what's going on, and and that's why it's good to speak to you guys. And if anyone in your friends or organisation can sort of prove that the Australian government are using Twitter bots or whatever, it would really be helpful. And it wouldn't be that hard to do because they're very arrogant, a bit like the example you just gave. It didn't take you long to be able to kind of expose it, because they're not used to people calling them on it. But it's very annoying, and it's obviously it's a very powerful thing for them to use, and I need people with your kind of sophistication to at least keep them on their toes, and so they can't get too lazy about these underhand methods. I'm pretty sure they're putting out a lot of false stories about me on the internet to kind of make sure that I don't get support, and it's hard to catch them out. You know, I saw someone, occasionally people who are friendly said, "Oh, look, I saw a fake profile of you," and they were trying to make you look bad with a fake profile. We got that shut down, but there's obviously a whole lot more that we don't know about going on, and it's good to speak to guys like you who understand all that stuff and are looking for it.
Yeah, and we've been dealing with it like for so many years, and even when the email started leaking from United States intelligence companies like HB Gary and Palantir, and we saw their internal emails discussing how they would discredit WikiLeaks with inserting fake documents into the site and attempting to make them look bad, for example. So
Yeah.
for Anons who've been around for a little longer, they know that these tactics are being used actively, and it all has to do with discrediting people. And like you're saying,
Yeah.
they make like fake profiles and say weird things to make you look bad. That's
Yeah.
that's how easy it is for the general public to they fall
Yeah,
for that
well, that's
stuff.
right. And it's quite hard because you don't want to draw attention to it. It makes it worse. But that's right. If there are people, one of my big things about my case, and what will probably win my case, if I can prove it, but I think that the sort of senior generals and the politicians in the Australian, I think they knew about the war crimes as early as 2012. And ever since then, they have been trying to work out how to draw it out, how to make a smoke screen, how to look like they're doing something when they're not actually doing anything. So if anyone who's listening can kind of prove that they did know early on, they say that the official claim is they didn't know until 2017. When they found out by accident from a sort of a social person who did a survey or something, and I think that's a lie. I think they knew a lot earlier than that, and I think that they didn't want the truth to come out when when the Australians were still there. The Americans probably told them it'll be bad press for them to try to win the war if it's widespread war crimes come out as early as 2013 and 2014. And so they were told to cover it up or to string it out for as long as possible. And they did a whole lot of cynical things, like they investigated things that weren't crimes, and they got scapegoats for various different other things which weren't big deals. At the same time that they knew there were 39 murders, but they kept that under wraps, and they tried to a bit like what politicians do when they've got a really big problem, they try to fight a small problem and use that as a distraction. And I believe that there was all that sophisticated media manipulation from as early as 2013, where they tried to create a smoke screen, cover up the war crimes for as long as possible, and also blame a couple of people low down the chain, and make sure that nobody in the senior generals or the politicians ever got blamed for it. One of the issues is unlike America, Australia is a member of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and the thing about the International Criminal Court is that they tend to not so much prosecute individual soldiers. They tend to prosecute generals and politicians. And so Australia was very scared by this, because they didn't want, the generals are very selfish, and they didn't want to be put on trial in The Hague themselves. But one way to avoid going in front of the International Criminal Court is if you can say, oh, we're going to investigate this ourselves. And it looks like the whole Brereton inquiry was possibly an attempt to get the International Criminal Court off their back, because they're saying, oh, we're investigating this, but it's 10 years have gone by now and they still haven't charged anybody, and it's quite possible another 10 years will go by and no one will even be charged. But the whole point of the Brereton inquiry is kind of a distraction, a smokescreen, so no politicians have to go in front of The Hague, the International Criminal Court.
Yeah. Okay. So in the International Criminal Court, I mean, that is in my country, and I know, like, if you have the Bosnian War, for example, that took place in 1992. I think Karadzic, one of the people who was responsible for that, Radovan Karadzic, he was only charged in 2017, if I'm correct. So that it took like decades before they even started charging him.
Yeah, it takes a long time, and but that's typical. He was the head of the sort of Bosnian Serbs or whatever, and but the court will, they will charge him, and that's what scares the Australian government, because if it's proved that there were systemic war crimes and that the government knew, it's the government that might have to face trial, and that scares the politicians, because there's a sort of it's the same as happened to Radovan Karadzic. He didn't commit any murder. Well, he might have, but I mean, he wasn't responsible for the murders himself, but he knew about them and he encouraged them. And the Australian leadership will at least have to justify whether they knew about them and encouraged them, and that will be a very awkward situation for them. They don't want to be the next Radovan Karadzic, and the reason that they're trying to stop that is they're saying, oh, we're having our own trials in Australia, but whether or not they really do have trials or they're just going to talk about them, we don't know yet.
No. Yeah, and back to what you were saying, that they are attempting to make you look bad or whatever. You're being vindicated with that whole Brereton report, and you mentioned the 39 deaths. There were 39 civilians dead, right?
There's 39. A lot more civilians died than that, but 39 cases which look like murders. Not just civilians dead, but Brereton was good. He said, look, I'm not going to look into anything where there was a battle going on between the Taliban and Australian forces, and somebody shot someone by mistake because he was scared or whatever, and somebody was on top of a roof and got shot. Brereton is not considering cases like that where it wasn't clear and it was what they call in the heat of battle. What he is considering is people being captured and interrogated and then taken into a back room and have a bullet put in the head. And there are 39 possible cases of that happening, so that's pretty serious. I mean, these are like executions.
Yeah, and the cruel treatment of 2 others, I'm reading.
Yeah, but that would be pretty serious. Whatever that is, there were even allegations as disturbing as a couple of 14-year-olds having their throats cut in cold blood, sort of thing. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but that's one of the things that's being investigated. So some quite disturbing things. Some of the soldiers are obviously were involved in a couple of the different situations. So there's only 19 soldiers that are under a serious investigation for murder. And there was a lot of claim of people being shot, just random civilians being shot. A bit like the one that was on the video, which you can see on TV, the killing fields. And once the person is shot dead, they find an old weapon, an old AK-47, or they're already carrying it with them. The Australians carrying it. They plant the weapon on the dead body. They take photos of it, and then they say, "Oh, this guy was holding this weapon. He was Taliban." But then it's been proved that sometimes the same weapon was used in photos, 2 years apart or something in different areas, and so it was clearly a setup, and and it was faked. Someone was murdered, and it was faked to look like they were Taliban, and that's been pretty much proven, because I think the journalists were able to show that this same weapon, because it had distinctive electrical tape around the weapon, and it's got the same tape and on this weapon, this AK-47, in two different locations, and that would be impossible, because once we capture a weapon, we don't give it back to them, and so that seems to have been, and the soldiers concerned with that seem to think it was a bit of a joke, and I think that's one of the things that the leaders of the military knew about, because when you capture weapons, the serial numbers of the weapon are checked and whatever, and they're checked by a number of different people, and senior people must have known that the same weapons were appearing, and yet they did nothing.
Exactly, yeah. And so that goes back into you being vindicated, and after that the Australian government created that thing called Office of the Special Investigator and an oversight panel. What do you think of that?
Oh, I don't know. I think that's probably a good step in the right direction. I'm happy with that. As you said, yeah, I've been vindicated in that regard. I hope that they can get on and have trials, and as soon as possible. The problem is, as years go on, it becomes harder and harder, and we do have to follow the rule of law, and if it goes on for too much longer, the trials won't be fair. And so, I'm divided. It is a good step. I'm obviously happy with the Burton inquiry, and I'm happy with that they set up the special investigator. Now I'm just hoping that they can get on and actually, have trials.
Yeah, and like what we've seen with the Assange case too, it pretty much only gets the attention when when the general public, or when all the activists together continue to speak out about it, right? And that's also one of the reasons why we were doing this episode, to at least inform all the Anons and the listeners about this case, and at least provide some basics, and also try to make this call to action for all these people to also get active on like hashtags like Afghan files, and search for what is going on, and actually speak out about this, because that helps to make sure that all the eyes are being put on this, right?
Yeah, it really helps, and Australia is we care about what the rest of the world thinks. We join up to things like the International Criminal Court. We like to be liked, and so if people, Anons around the world, are tweeting about this or whatever you do, chatting about it, that will really help my case. You don't really have to do much more than that. It's all it's a lot of information we've talked about, but it's all online. If you just if you put into a search engine David McBride, I tend to come up at the top now, and that's McBride, and you can see all about my case. There's a lot of articles about it, and they're it's all mainstream media. You've got to take it with a grain of salt, but it's basically you find out the background of the case. And if people can talk about it, because there's a lot of similarities between the Assange case and my case, and the central one being we've exposed serious crimes. You can't put the whistleblower in jail unless you're investigating, Hillary Clinton and the various other hundreds of people in the US administration, let alone the generals, let alone the soldiers, let alone George W. Bush. Let's start looking at these people first before we look at Julian Assange. We want to see some action against people who have broken the law. Now, you might not be able to convict them, but at least you can't just let them go scot-free, and someone should be answering questions to say, did we break the law in Iraq? Did we create an illegal invasion? Did we commit war crimes? We need to see, the helicopter pilots on trial. We need to start seeing action against more than just the whistleblowers, and your organisation can help about that. Just talk. I'm grateful that people know about it. As I've got a Twitter account, it's quite popular. The more people I get on Twitter and will help. And now I've met you, we can stay in contact and we can do more shows or whatever to kind of increase. People might have specific questions I can talk about, and we can just go from here.
Yeah, and just I'm not sure if you want to repeat this, but someone in the chat is asking, does David still have charges pending? We already discussed it, I guess.
Yeah, I do. I'm facing trial in my first trial in May 2021. But it's a good question, I guess, to say, as a lot of people in Australia have said, is like, why is this guy still being charged after the Burgeon report came out? I mean, it's not such a bad question, because a lot of people can't understand why I'm still on trial. And I think it goes to the kind of government, they don't like being embarrassed. It doesn't matter whether what you said is true or not. They don't want people in the future coming forward and seeing the press, and they want to make an example of it. It shows you how ridiculous the system is. Even if you're vindicated, even if it's proved that what you were saying is right, the government still wants to put you in jail, which shows you that the world is getting a little bit out of control.
Yeah, exactly. I hope that answers your question, Modema Rose. And on that, what we're talking about the Afghan files thing, right? And that is like pretty much that's like the big leak, the big exposure is called Afghan files.
Yeah, that's right. That was the story that the ABC did.
Okay, and so for listeners, I want to ask you guys to go to that hashtag. And also actively approach the people who we assume, I guess, are government funded, military funded trolls trying to discredit it, and explain that pretty much everything that's in it has been vindicated now by military's own research, right? And
that's right. Yeah.
And what else would you say, can people do to support you?
I've got a GoFundMe campaign called something like 50 Years in Prison for Whistleblowing on the ADF. I'm grateful for any donations at small. There's a petition around to have the charges dropped. But I think with your specialty in your organisation, if people could try to expose government bots and look at that kind of thing, that would really help me. When did the government know about the war crimes? And that's the sort of stuff which you guys can probably look into, I think, which would really help. just stay in tune. I mean, the trial is approaching, and more things are going to happen between now and the trial. I'll probably get it's possible I'll have a smear campaign against me. Like Assange, I'm always very worried about people I meet that they're going to try and set me up for something.
Yeah.
But it's great to make contact, I guess. And if people know about the case, they'll think about ways that they can help. But I mean, it's really nice just to speak to you and to have, knowing that you've got a lot of listeners, and that just makes me feel good. I'll be in a good mood all day today now. With a little bit of support, you get so much strength.
Well, yeah, of course. And I mean, I'm looking at like the YouTube chat, for example, and there's only people supporting you. There's like no negativity either. So that's kind of unique because there's always someone.
Yeah, I'm lucky that way. At first, I used to be really scared, and I couldn't bear to look at the comments because I was too anxious. But now they're all really positive, so it's nice.
Yeah, someone asked, I'm not aware what this is, by the way, but did Four Corners do a special on this story recently?
Yeah, Four Corners is the one where they show the guy getting shot in the field. That's I think it's called The Killing Fields, Four Corners. That's worth having a watch if you want to see, the truth about what was really going on. Our story came out before that. A lot of people think that the Four Corners program wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done the Afghan files first, and that people got courage to come forward, and more people came forward and said, yeah, I've got this footage, I've got this, I've got that. And it started something. There was a chain reaction, and more things have happened which have embarrassed the government. But yeah, Four Corners has a very good graphic footage on it.
Okay, and there is something I do want to mention that we didn't mention yet, and that is actually that the Australian police did actually also launch a direct attack against the media for covering this, right? Because in 2019 they executed a search warrant on the ABC's premises, and it lasted 8 hours.
Yeah, that was quite extraordinary, and that was in some ways that was lucky for me. It was bad precedent, but then the media started to care. The mainstream media started to care about my case. Yeah, because the police went to a TV station. They inspected all the computers. They took hard drives. They took a lot of information off it. The journalists the Afghan file journalists were in fear of being put in prison. They thought they were going to be charged. The police were sort of finding out about their travel, and it was a very worrying time for journalists. Another journalist had their house raided. They did a different story, but again, a story about, it was a bit like a Snowden story, and the idea that the government was doing secret surveillance on all the citizens, bulk collection programs. Now that journalist Annika Smethurst, she was living in fear of going to jail because that was a classified information. She was vindicated. It was a true story, but the government, as in my case, the government didn't care whether it was true or not. They just didn't want to be embarrassed. So they were very heavy-handed with those journalists. And that was good because it created quite a lot of backlash by people saying, really, what have we become? Australia has become like a police state, and people think of it as a very sunny, laid-back place. But, in few countries of the world were TV stations getting raided and people being threatened with long sentences. And, it woke the world up to say Australia is, the police state in Australia is really getting out of hand.
Yeah, because they were probably hoping it would have the opposite effect, and they would intimidate journalists with it or intimidate media with it. But actually, it put all eyes on them, right? And it just,
I think it backfired. I think again, I think a lot of it was public appearance. Everything is done for appearance. because I think that they had all the information. They'd already raided my house a couple of years beforehand, and I think they had all the information they needed in my case. And I think that they only went to the TV station for show to intimidate journalists, but it backfired because there was suddenly a campaign, and it was one of the rare things where you see in Australia. It's never been done before, where all three of the major media companies joined together and said this is wrong. They started a campaign called Your Right to Know, and they said, and it was rare to see all the three rival media companies agreeing with each other and saying, we think this is wrong. The government can't try to put journalists in jail for printing the truth. So it did backfire, but I think they did it on purpose as an intimidatory technique. But it did manage to intimidate journalists. Apparently, a lot of investigative journalists said that they had stories ready to go before that happened, and then once those raids happened, a lot of people backed out of the stories. A lot of people said, "Look, I don't want to talk to you anymore," and give me the documents back. So it did have a scare effect on the Australian on journalists and would-be whistleblowers. A lot of them were scared off, but it also had the unwanted effect that it started a media campaign against the government crackdown.
Yeah, and so they did manage to intimidate at least some journalists, but it took them a year before they said that they wouldn't press charges against that. Dan Oakes.
It was that's right. Dan Oakes was under pressure for a long time, and he was very relieved when they finally said that they wouldn't press charges, but it looked like they were going to. So I was happy for him in that regard, and I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens in my trial, because it will create a precedent about what's going to happen in other trials in the future. From the government's point of view, they're obviously trying to stop future whistleblowers, and from the media's point of view, we would hopefully try and set a precedent to say it's the right thing to do to come forward if you see something which is really wrong in government. So, it's almost going to become a proxy battle for the future of sort of investigative journalism, the case, to see what happens.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning the International Criminal Court, and so I was reading a little bit about that while we were talking, and it was this Eve Messingham. She is a senior research fellow with the School of Law at the University of Queensland, and she actually said about Australia as a state party to the Rome Statute establishing the International Criminal Court. Australia is bound by the norms of international humanitarian law and has a duty to investigate potential breaches. And she argues that under the first article of the Geneva Convention, Australia has an obligation beyond wartime to ensure compliance with the laws of war, which includes a duty to take preventative measures. And then there's one statement she really makes on this, and that says it will not be possible for Australia to ensure respect for the law of war if investigations are hampered by a culture of secrecy, and knowing that coming forward will be detrimental. Military personnel at all levels must have it ingrained in them that speaking up is not career ending.
Yeah, she's right. I mean, that really helps me in the sense that it's in the Geneva Conventions and in the International Criminal Court statute that you actually have a duty to look into crime and do something about it. It doesn't matter. It's not just a duty not to commit crime, but you actually have an active duty to investigate, to report, to not take no for an answer. And I complied with that. That's why I said I want my case to be run on whether it was my duty to do that or not. And I would say it's completely my duty within the Geneva Conventions. And Yeah, no, that article's right to say it would look very bad for Australia if they try to put me in jail for trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and so I'm mentioning that too because in March 2020, the ICC was given a go-ahead to probe into Afghanistan and investigate at least war crimes and crimes against humanity. And in September last year, the United States starts punishing the criminal court, or attempting to punish it. It started to attack the ICC. This had to do specifically with U.S. forces, right? But the
Yeah,
ICC was already busy investigating it, and so on September the 2nd, Mike Pompeo announced new sanctions would be applied against ICC Special Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and her top aide. So the U.S. seems to be not happy about this.
yeah. I mean, that's outrageous. That is actually quite outrageous. And Australia is in an embarrassing position because we're a signatory to the ICC and the original founding member. And yet the Americans are trying to destroy it. And there is absolutely um, no legal basis for the Americans to be putting sanctions on the ICC for looking into crimes committed by American soldiers. That's exactly what the ICC is meant to do.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of it. If the ICC was able to be intimidated by nations who committed war crimes, it wouldn't be any good at all. It wouldn't achieve anything. And the idea that the Americans, well, it says everything about where the Americans have gone, where the United States, how far off the rails it has gone as a government when their Secretary of State starts trying to bully and intimidate a court whose purpose is to actually prosecute war crimes. You can't get a starker illustration of how wrong things are going in the United States government than he tried to put sanctions on the ICC for daring, and they didn't even convict anybody, but they were just looking into serious allegations, and that was, the Americans can't handle that. I mean, that's a reflection of things being very wrong.
Yeah, because if you don't even allow the research, the investigation, then you must have something to hide, right? I mean, have them investigated.
Yeah.
But the ICC convicted
Intimidating
the United. Yeah, intimidating. But yeah, I know that's just a delay. Like we're on a long distance, but but the ICC convicted the United States in 1986 for their actions in Nicaragua. So they've got a bad trauma, I guess, of that. But
well, that was bad. We had to study that Nicaragua case at law school, and again, it was uncomfortable for Australians because we are part of the American forces now. We do everything with them. But yeah, the Nicaragua case is very embarrassing, where the Americans were sponsoring terrorists basically to go in and destabilize a country, and they got caught out for it. And it showed that they weren't interested in following the rule of law at all. They thought it was all right if they gave money to people to go and blow up places in a country whose government they didn't like. It would be okay, but it's actually sponsoring terrorism.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and they were convicted for that. So
the court said it's wrong.
Yeah, and then they no longer allowed any. They said they had no jurisdiction over them, and then there were Dutch lawyers actually saying, we do have our jurisdiction over you guys because you accepted it back then. And
oh no, it doesn't stop there. And again, I'm embarrassed as a lawyer because we work closely with them. But Guantanamo Bay was the same, and it was a deliberate, cynical ploy to say people have, if we captured suspected anyone, prisoners of war basically in Afghanistan, and if we took them back to America, they'd have certain human rights in America. And also, if they were prisoners of war in Afghanistan, they'd have certain rights under the Geneva Conventions. So what they did, thinking that they were clever, is they took them to Guantanamo Bay, which was not American territory, was not Afghanistan, and they said they're not prisoners of war. They made up a term which didn't have any legal truth to it, to say they're enemy combatants, not prisoners of war. They're not in America, and therefore they have no rights at all. And that was a pretty outrageous thing to do. They got away with it because there was so much hysteria after 9/11. But a lot of these people were simple soldiers, Afghans, drivers, and they were tortured and treated in a subhuman, illegal way. And the Americans, as you said, they just said, no one else in the world has jurisdiction over us. American exceptionalism, and it was pretty bad that they got away with that.
Yeah, and it also shows. So this entire thing of them putting out sanctions against the ICC, it also shows the disrespect they have towards their own allies, right? I mean, because we talked a little before the show, and you were also stationed in the Uruzgan area, right? And the Australians were sent in to replace the Dutch, for example, and that is the home location of the ICC, and it just shows both Netherlands and Australia are actively participating in the ICC. And I want to mention that in 2001, under Bush, the Americans actually wrote a thing called, we nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but it pretty much says that whenever American politicians or important figures are incarcerated, arrested by the ICC, the Americans have the power to invade The Hague and free them by force.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, it is literally.
It's pretty outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I saw that the Italians stood up to them too once when they did an illegal rendition of someone out of Italy, and the Italians said we put out arrest warrants for a whole lot of CIA operatives. But then I think the Americans, staged a coup in Italy and would basically change the government as a result. But that's pretty outrageous. And these are as you said, these are their allies.
Their closest allies too. And I mean, we were dragged into war almost instantly when they wanted to go to war, and we immediately said yes, our government, and it just shows a disrespect. Yeah, officially it's called, I was looking it up for you real quick, officially it's called the American Service Members Protection Act, but it is the act nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act.
You're right. It's good to speak to somebody who gets it, because this is the sort of stuff which really, winds me up, that they get away with so much. And you don't know where to start with some people to say, look, there's a lot of very wrong things going on in the world at the moment. I saw just recently a guy died who was in Guantanamo Bay for 10 years, and he apparently he'd been Osama bin Laden's driver or something, but he was a very low-level guy. He was Sudanese, or Ethiopian or something, and he was tortured in Guantanamo Bay really badly, so much so that by the time he got out, they said he was just like mentally disabled, and he had to go and live with his 90-year-old mother, and he really couldn't really function as a human being anymore. He could barely speak, and he died. And it was a really sad case, because he clearly was not any kind of master terrorist. He was like a chauffeur, and but he was tortured so badly in Guantanamo Bay that they sent him mad. And it was a sad case, and it was a stark realization of how out of control things have got. And it's totally against all sort of principles of international. And they wouldn't have got any information of any use out of this guy. And it's a really, it's cruelty, and it shows that they really do not care about international law.
Yeah, and torture. Like, I mean, human rights experts, and I mean, torture is illegal on the European human rights laws for a reason, and that is because they state like any evidence you get under torture is not valid evidence. You can pretty much have anyone say anything, right? If you torture him, heavy enough.
It's that American exceptionalism again, and it's not a matter of sort of some torture getting out of control, but it's like they change the law and they'd say, oh, well, let's not torture. Americans don't torture. And they'd say it really cynically, and they'd nudge, wink, wink. That means that whatever Americans do is not torture under our definition.
No, they just call it advanced interrogation methods, right?
Yeah, exactly. They just changed the name. They did the same thing in the bombing in Syria when they were worried about, well, not worried, but in order to make sure they didn't kill any civilians, they simply changed the definition of what a civilian was. So anybody who was in an ISIS-held area was considered ISIS. There could have been an old lady crossing the street or whatever, but because they were in a geographic area, they were classified as ISIS, and so if they were killed, they didn't have to declare it as a civilian, casualty, which is just highly cynical. It's criminal. They just sort of change the law to suit themselves and say, oh, that person is not a civilian, that's not torture. We will just change the laws and get away with it. And they don't realise it. As a soldier, you don't realise it's stupid, because that sort of action creates terrorists. We like to. This is one of the things that we wanted to. I found very disturbing when I found out that we like to. The message we like to put out is that, oh, look, there's a very few disgruntled Islamic extremists who have been brainwashed. We like to use that word. They're brainwashed in madrasas to hate the West. But actually, if we start doing things like that, if we change the definition of torture to suit ourselves, if we change the definition of civilian in a cynical way, we create, these people are not brainwashed, we create people with legitimate complaints to say that the West is just a corrupt organisation that lies for their own ends. And actually they have more people volunteering to be suicide bombers than they have, explosives enabled to, to make the vests. Then these people are not brainwashed. These people hear about what we actually do, the truth about what we do, and it makes them hate us. And so it's not even smart carrying out these extreme things. It actually just makes the war worse. And I have a feeling the problem is that a lot of people don't care whether the war gets worse, because it helps win elections. To have enemies is a good thing. You can sell more planes, everybody votes for you if there's a war, and I don't think that they really want to. It's hard to believe that they truly want to win the so-called war on terror when they do things which actually make it worse.
Yeah. Okay, and on that note, someone asked in the chat, will David be permitted to argue the greater public good defense in his case?
That's a good question. And yes, I will. Unlike Julian Assange, that will come up in my case. The government will try to shut it down, but it's certainly it's available. That's what, as I said, I'm going to run it as my duty. But I am very lucky that that's a difference between my case and anyone facing trial in America, where they don't get that option, and that's obviously that's wrong, and that's highly illegal, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, and there's another question. As being a whistleblower, he is risking his life, I think. Has he any words for the people that may be wondering if it is worth the risk uh, to risk their lives for the sake of others?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it is. I don't have any regrets. Saying that, I was a soldier, and so I was always prepared to fight for my country and, if necessary, die. I see it as a bit like going to war. And if I die, at least I will have achieved something. It's hard with children. Um, I don't. It's not for everybody, and I wouldn't say is everybody go and do it. It is incredibly hard, and you need to be prepared to kind of fight till the end, because unfortunately that's what happens. But I'm very proud of who I am. I don't think I've ever liked myself as much. It is hard having two teenage daughters who, if I did go to jail forever or worse, they might not ever see me again. But I mean, as they grow older, um, they'll be very proud of who I am. And I think when you're a soldier, when you're a lawyer, and when you really believe in our system of democracy, it's hard not to stand up. It's not so much like that you can do a pros and cons list. You really have to do it, even though there's great risks involved. Because I think it's a Jewish saying, if not me, who, and if not now, when. And that's the sort of thing that goes through your mind, to say that you really have to do it. But yeah, hopefully after me, other people will come, and again we will help to sort of improve the situation.
I hope that answers it for you. Yeah. Okay. So my question is, how do you expect this to end? Do you think it will actually go
I
for the
think I'll
better?
win. I think I'm going to win. I might go to jail, but I think if I do go to jail, I will win on appeal. Um, Public support will be will come through, because people will see. Even my enemies can see that I'm well intentioned. I did what I thought was right. I didn't blow anything up. I didn't sell secrets to the enemy. I believed I exposed corruption, and I don't think that will get away with putting me in jail for very long. As I said, it may involve going to jail. I think we've got a good chance in the case, but the government, a bit like Julian Assange's case, the government is going to fight it very hard. Um, so I'm hopeful that we will win, and winning for me will be just creating public awareness about these issues. And if that means spending some time in jail, well, maybe that's a win as well. I'm looking forward to writing my book, and again, it will be a win if more people around the world are aware of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you already sparked this whole reform thing in Australia. In that sense, that the Australian Human Rights Law Centre sent this a letter to the Senate Environment and Communications Reference Committee inquiry on press freedom in 2019, and they identified 5 key areas for reform in Australia, right? And they said they want to strengthen whistleblower protections under the Public Interest Disclosure Act from 2013, and that's probably what you were just talking about too, about the public interesting.
Yeah, that's part of my case, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, and I have triggered that, or one of the key things, because even though they passed this act, the Public Interest Disclosure Act in 2013, and even though I tried to use it, the act might not protect me, and it's been pointed out that that's ridiculous. When I tried to, make a public interest disclosure, I tried to use the Act, and even now I'm still going to jail. People are like, well, the Act must be ridiculous if someone tried to use it and they couldn't use it and they end up going to jail. And so, yes, it's good that people are looking into that to say we need to, if the Act doesn't protect people like me, we need to change the Act.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, this might be something completely unrelated, but someone asks, does David think that the COVID restrictions, like the inability to travel, indicate a larger, more widespread information or trade war, Cold War 2.0, which is leading toward a hot war in the near future? I'm not sure about that.
It's not. It's got. There's something in there. I have to say, I am very worried about the information operations in relation to COVID. As I said, the control of the media in order to achieve certain results is concerning. And the way that universal messages are put out, and anyone that has a different view, it can be painted as a crank or an idiot or a conspiracy theory. That concerns me, and I've heard from people in the who used to be senior in the military and who know about these things. They said to me even this 6 months ago that there will continue to be flashpoints against China, and that we will eventually go to war against China in some way, a bit like Iraq, in that it was always going to happen. I mean, that's so. The terrible thing about that question and is that I even being an insider and being across a lot of secret information, I can't say that that's not true. And that in itself, that is very concerning to say that is possible. All of that is actually possible. I haven't seen any conclusive evidence to say that's not true. And that's one of my incentives in my case, to say it's not so much about what went on in Afghanistan. It's not so much about the past, it's about the future. If we continue to fight wars based on false information and put out false statements and create enemies that are not there, that's going to happen again in the future. And we will get talked into a war with China, which was avoidable, and which was talked up by special interest groups who wanted it to happen. That's what I'm really fighting against, the future, to make sure the public are a little bit more cynical about what we're told. It's not the past I'm concerned with, but I'm concerned that might happen, and that's what I want to fight against. So actually, it's a very good question, even though it deals with big issues.
Yeah, to me it was interesting too, because it does point towards how the media spins its own narrative surrounding everything, and they don't really like dissident voices on that. And we now literally can see, whatever reason you have to be against the mainstream story of the whole COVID situation, a lot of accounts are being deleted, YouTube channels are being deleted, and I think it is an example on how people in power try to also control.
It is definitely concerning. And you saw the same things with Syria in relation to. There were a lot of questions over whether the poison gas attacks were false flag or not, done by the security services, and anybody that the Western security services, anybody that questioned that sort of official narrative was kind of branded a crank. And even though they had whistleblowers from whistleblowers from within the chemical, weapons, the UN organisation, who said that there's something wrong going on here. They were sort of like rubbished and whatever. So I think it is actually, it's possible that the whole COVID thing is engineered, for a war. I'm not saying it happened, that's definite, but it is actually scary to say that would be possible for them to to be stage managing everything, controlling the media, and making people do some sort of extreme thing which wasn't even necessary. And I find that the fact that it's even possible that our own, security services would do that, that is very concerning.
Yeah, whether it's just engineered from the start or there's like opportunism taking place. Like, I mean, everything is possible.
Well, you see exactly. You see that, who's won out of it. They managed to discredit China. They managed to clamp down on a lot of, dissent. They managed to sort of control. The governments have become more popular, centralised governments. Yeah, drug companies have made a fortune out of it. A lot of other companies who do testing have made a fortune. Yeah, there's been a lot of winners from it, and it's sort of kind of slightly suspicious that so many people have been motivated. It's like I think I've seen someone point it out on Twitter. Isn't it suspicious how countries that we don't like seem to carry out cyber attacks on us, which nobody can really prove. But, China apparently carries out a cyber attack, and Iran has done another cyber attack on us, and we have to take the security, services word for it, that these cyber attacks have occurred, and therefore we have to retaliate. But we never really know whether it's true or not, and it's suspicious how it's all the countries that we hate do these, Russia, do these special cyber attacks that only the security services know whether it really happened or not,
Yeah, no, exactly. And this also goes back into like the entire reasons for the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, right? I mean, the 9/11 event, and they immediately coming up with people to blame for it. Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and they kept repeating it as much as possible in the media until like the general public agreed to like waging wars in these countries they never even talked about before. So yeah, and they kept pushing on it, and
I believe that. And as I said, that was one of the advantages I had from having been to Afghanistan when the Taliban were actually in charge. And I knew that the Taliban, they were taking money from Osama bin Laden, but so he could have refuge. But they didn't particularly like him. He was a Wahhabist. He was a separate. He had a very separate view of the world. They were not interested in world revolution. The people were starving mainly because of unfair sanctions put on by the UN, and war could have been avoided. Even after 9/11, war could have been avoided. The Taliban would have been amenable to some sort of reasonable arrangement, but the Americans didn't really want that. They wanted war because war looked good. War won elections, dropping bombs on people in far off places with black turbans on. That was what they really wanted to do, and I think that's one of the reasons why it went so wrong. Because we were never there for the right reasons. We were never really there to improve Afghanistan or get subject. We were there for the media show. We wanted to see bombs being dropped and explosions going off and people firing, because that's really what, and because that was the overall goal. This just positive media show and positive, American flags waving, mission accomplished. It meant that anything that went against that, and if any time we made a mistake or whatever, the action was as if, because it was all being run by media people rather than soldiers, the first thing was to cover it up, rather than say, okay, we need to look into this because we need to have a system of justice, and we need to, it's more important that we do the right thing. If soldiers had been running it, that's what it would have happened, but the sort of media people were running it, and so everything was like, cover that up, let's get a shot of the American flag. Let's get let's put out false statements about how bad the Iraqis were. I mean, it's a fact that everybody knows. We created ISIS. We definitely did things that actually created these guys who we claim are our biggest enemy. But if we hadn't taken certain very questionable actions after we invaded in the first place, but I mean, everything we did actually created our own enemy, and that shows you how wrong we have gone with these tactics.
Yeah, like you're saying, it was also a media war, right? I mean, you're talking about arguably the most powerful country in the world, and suddenly, being attacked, and people wanted, or they were made to want them striking back, right? And
it was all done with focus groups and what will look good and what will win votes. This is one of the things that I could see myself as an insider, and it made me angry. Like in Syria, when they were bombing ISIS in 2016, I think, 17. ISIS had no air force. They controlled ground, but they had no planes. And so if you wanted to do air operations against ISIS, you could use a helicopter or a drone would be fine. But instead of doing that, they use all these fast jets. Americans use fast jets, dropping bombs at great speed, and which is highly inaccurate. And you might have to use a fast jet if you're fighting a country with lots of fast jets, but of course ISIS didn't have that. And I reckon the reason that they were using, there were two reasons they were using fast jets. One is that the sort of makers of fast jets, the big companies like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, were probably pushing it because they cost so much money. But secondly, it's because it looked sexy. What I found was quite obscene was they had a Twitter feed called Operation Inherent Resolve or whatever, and on this Twitter feed was just picture after picture of fast jet taking off and saying, oh, we did this mission and we dropped these bombs and what a huge success it was. And obviously it wasn't a success. But the idea, the image of the fast jet dropping a bomb was what a lot of people wanted to see. It didn't matter whether it was actually creating a worse problem. They loved that kind of imagery, and it was all about the imagery. George Bush and his mission accomplished banner, when it was anything but mission accomplished back in 2003. Imagery started to rule the war rather than facts.
Exactly. And of course you have them interested in certain resources too in the area, particularly Iraq, I guess.
Oh yeah, of course, because they can see that. I mean, one of the big American slogans is, they hate us for our freedoms. Well, they don't hate us for our freedoms. They hate us for our bullshit. And if we put out false statements about, what went on, and they can see it. And this is one of the problems with information operations. It's all very well putting out a false statement about an operation that went on in Iraq or Afghanistan. And you might fool the American public, you might fool the Australian public, but you don't fool the Afghans, you don't fool the Iraqis, and it really damages the Western democracy brand when the local people see that we tell lies about what's going on, because they know, they can see through it, and they just think the Western democracies are corrupt, and that we are creating a problem for the future rather than solving a problem. We'd be much better off going back to Iraq, going back to Afghanistan. This is one of the things I want to do, and apologising and saying we made mistakes. We were best, we might have had good intentions or whatever, but we did make mistakes and we admit them, and that would go a long way, because they can accept that people make mistakes. What they can't accept is that we we lie about it, we cover up, and we refuse to see that we acted in selfish motives, and we killed a lot of their people for our own purposes.
Yeah, yeah. Someone in the chat. Yeah, this is like. Okay, when the enemy refuses to fight, the USA commits atrocities until they do.
Yeah,
I tend to agree with that too.
That's a simple statement, but it's true. Yeah, we keep on exactly, and then we paint them as the bad guys. Yeah, we'll keep on dropping bombs on the wrong people, and then when they fight back, we go, "Oh, terrorists!" You know, a lot of these people in Afghanistan who fought us, they fought us because somebody dropped a bomb on their father's house, and he was just a farmer, killed their father or their uncle or whatever, and now we have created, you know, and now that the son comes to fight us, but the only reason he's fighting us is because we killed his dad by mistake, you know.
Someone is giving you a compliment. He says, keep the fight alive, David. You sound like a good person with your heart in the right place. Stay strong.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, and someone else is asking a question. What do you think about the USA intervention in Latin American countries? Elections like Venezuela.
Well, it's terrible, and it's. I think the hypocrisy of this came up recently when there was a huge amount of hysteria in America about the riots in Washington D.C. on the 6th of January or whatever it was, and people who know about what's gone on in the world say, you know, the US has created chaos in other people's democracies for 50 years, especially Latin America and Central America. It has been very tragic. I mean, it's too much to even look at what they've done in Central America and destabilized any country that isn't totally beholden to them. And yeah, hopefully we can shine a light on it. The amount of countries that the CIA or the American government in some format has destabilized, it's quite sickening. And they managed to get away with it. And another one of my big bugbears is the so-called war on drugs. The amount of bloodshed and unhappiness and destabilization that has caused in Central America is just phenomenal, and it's to do with it's a bit like the wars in the Middle East. It's been fought for all the wrong reasons and with no genuine attempt to solve the problem. But just because it looks good for voters, and yet it has a huge cost on those people in Central America that have to live with the effects of this American policy.
I hope that answers your question. And that's anonymous from Argentina, and says. I heard Facebook did interventions to help the last Argentina president win the elections, and does social media also have power in the USA Army, or in this case Australian Army, I guess. We already discussed it a bit before, but perhaps it is interesting to just repeat it a bit about how social media is being used too by the military. I mean,
yeah, absolutely, and I think that's particularly concerning because people don't know that, and people think it's grassroots, and they're all over it, and they have. It's not just some amateur; they would have a whole department creating false Facebook or social media stuff, making it look like it's grassroots, and yet they've got more people working on the image on the Facebook pages than they have actually doing real things. This is what really worries me about the Australian military, is that we increasingly only care about public image, and it doesn't really matter what really happens. We don't actually need to protect. We're trying to win the war on terror by pretending we're winning the war on terror. It doesn't matter what actually goes on. We don't even put in any real operations anymore. We only put in information operations. That is, show pictures on social media, put out stories, interview people. It could all be false, and because the Defence Department don't see there's anything wrong with that. They just see that that's part of being a modern professional military, is putting out false messaging.
Yeah. So and digital warfare is now a real thing, and is now really part of what the armies do of the different governments around the world, and they actively participate also in attacks against people like yourself, whistleblowers, and manipulate the public opinion against whistleblowers or independent journalists covering such cases, and that's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. They have real departments. There'll be real majors, generals, captains, civilians. They will have a whole department, and they'll have a proper building, and they'll have a lot of computers, and that will be their job, is to put out, and they don't see it as false statements. They classify it as a military operation. So they don't think there's anything wrong with, ruining my reputation or whatever. They just see that I'm the enemy, and they will do whatever it takes. And that's how modern militaries are run. With false information has become the normal thing that they do, and this is one of the things I was concerned about, to say it's no longer anything what people care about, whether or not something is true. It's just about winning the information war any way you can, and that, if that means putting out false statements, that's what they do. And of course, I think that is very worrying for the future.
I hope that answers your question.
I've got a dog, and he needs to go out and have a wee at some point. So I don't know whether we could take a break and come back to talking.
Yeah, of course. I mean, do you want to do a part 2 like later on, or do you?
Part 2 later on might be better, because I'm getting tired now. But I've enjoyed it, and maybe it could be good, because your listeners or whatever might have more questions, and we might get some more interest. We could come back next week or in a few days and have a part 2.
Yeah, I think that's better actually, and then we can give some updates on recent events and things. I'm just wondering, is there's something left you really want to mention?
No, I'm just really grateful. I'd just like to thank you, and thank you for your work. And it's very important, the work Anonymous does, because we need people like you who can find out truth from fiction and actually get evidence or whatever, because it's a dangerous situation to be in, where anybody can be painted as a conspiracy theorist who doesn't agree with the narrative or whatever. And you do sometimes need hard evidence in order to win people over. And I'm really grateful to your organisation. And also, we talk about great risks. I mean, you guys take risks. You take risks all the time. And again, I as a fellow warrior, I salute you, because you there's plenty of people who have gone to jail and gone to jail quietly. At least I've made a noise, but plenty of people either they're hacking for a good cause, or they're just involved with dissemination of information. They're researching, and they go to jail too, or they get harassed. Some of them probably get killed. So I take my hat off to all the people in your organisation or associates who are trying to do the right thing, and sometimes at great risk to themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I can only say I respect the fact that you just like went public with all of that, knowing what kind of risks it would bring you. And I mean, when you talk about anonymous, yeah, there is plenty of anons exposing things, leaking things online, and they use anonymity to stay safe, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. And anons amplify each other in that sense, and that can be very powerful. But
Yeah,
in your
which is good. But you,
go ahead.
yeah, yeah, but you take risks. I mean, yes, I think with me, I was just so angry about it, and particularly because I believed in the system and I believed in democracy, and I really thought I was doing the right thing. Yeah, and when I started to see things that were wrong, I was so angry to think that the Western world, we had become the bad guys, and that just made me so angry, and I thought, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah, and it is a lot of respect for that, and I only see a lot of people respecting the fact that you actually did that, and they're sending hearts and things, so I can
And I tell you, well, I'm grateful for that, because that makes me feel strong. There are times like anyone, times like you feel down and you can't really, you feel very depressed. But hearing that, a little bit of support, you feel 10 feet tall. You think, I can handle this. I can go to jail. I can hold my head up high with a bit of support. So you guys have really helped me. You're part of my team by just expressing support. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, the support is coming from the right people, right? Normal people who are not part of this establishment that obviously doesn't like the fact that they're being exposed. Right. So.
And that's why it's good for me, to be a normal sort of person, and to try to get that middle of the road support to say, look, he's a middle class guy with an Oxford University degree, and he thinks what we're doing is wrong. He's not an extremist, but he thinks what we're doing is wrong. So maybe we need to have a better look at it.
Yeah, and so and I won't keep you on much longer. I mean, you have to do other things. We'll do like a part 2 then, maybe in a week or so.
Yeah, I look forward. I'm very happy to do a part 2. I've really enjoyed it. I just better take my dog out.
Yeah,
I'll send you a photo for next week.
Hey, so and for people to find you, you do most things on Twitter, right? I mean, that's where people can find you.
Yeah, that's Twitter's obviously imperfect, but yeah, they can find me on Twitter, David McBride. My handle is @Murdoch Cadell.
I'll post that below the stream. That helps. But when they type David McBride, they will probably find you.
Yeah.
And otherwise, search also on the hashtag Afghan Files or David
Files
or David McBride trial, and you'll find it too.
Yeah, I've done some YouTube videos talking about it. And sometimes they're quite sort of specialist, but there may be things there that people want to watch.
Okay. Well, thank you anyway for coming on, and we'll do a part 2 later.
No, thank you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be heard, and I'm grateful for the work you guys do. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Let's speak next week or whenever you're available.
Will do. And to all of you listeners, please share it around. That's what we depend on. We don't have any advertisement budgets or whatever. We depend on you, all of you activists, to speak out, and also like we said, check out the hashtags Afghan Files and David McBride trial, and also help defend whistleblowers and independent press, please. Okay, so we'll talk later then, David. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Great to talk.